How are you doing, PLO Order? Another episode, another video, another topic. And today's topic is facing aggression and how to play versus maniacs. One of the biggest mysteries in PLO, because for a lot of starting players or even experienced players, the aggressive opponents generate the most challenges for us. So let's get started. Why is it so hard? What makes it so hard to play versus aggressive opponents? I mean, often we consider them as fishies or bad players, but it's hard to play versus them. So, why is it so? Well, one, aggressive opponent is unpredictable. We don't know what he has. We don't know what he's going to do. He can do a lot of things. It's really hard to predict what he's going to do, unless he's super maniac who pots every time. That's predictable, but we don't know what he has. And then uncertainty creates stress. We are not sure what we should do. We are not sure what's happening. We're not sure what he's doing. We're not sure what his strategy is. And it creates stress. And then often with aggressive players, the thing is, pots get bigger because they raise, they bet, they re-raise. And every time when the pot gets bigger, it creates stress. Because it's actual money. If we play with play money, where there's no monetary value, it wouldn't create stress. But for a lot of players, it's natural that on $100 pot, you're a bit more stressed than on 50-cent pot. It shouldn't be. It should be just numbers. But it's natural. The bigger the pots are, the more stress we face. And then the outcome is a lot of stressful situations where we are uncertain what to do. So the stress just keeps piling up. And if we win the pot, the stress is relieved. The outcome is good for us. We won the pot. But if we keep losing, the stress just keeps piling up and it's going to affect us. Stress affects everyone. It affects differently to different people. For some, it really starts to affect your thinking, your physical body. And for some, it's a very small effect. But that's the thing. With aggressive players, we go to the area where we are not comfortable. And that's why it's so hard. And what often helps in uncertain situations is if we can generate certainty. So we know the strategy. We have a plan. We know that, okay, we have an aggressive player. I'm going to do this. And then we follow the strategy. We win, we lose. Who knows? But if we can trust the strategy, we know that, okay, I'm doing the right thing. It's easier to accept the uncertainty. It's easier to handle the stress because you have some certainty. But the problem is if we don't have a strategy, we cannot generate certainty. So that's what we're trying to do today. Wake up some strategical thoughts. One thing to note is that not all aggressive opponents are the same. Not all maniacs are the same. And there's a big difference whether the aggression is controlled or uncontrolled. And that's often where I draw the line. Of course, there's different levels of aggression and we can do subcategories as many as we want, but the biggest thing when you face an aggressive opponent is to figure out whether he has controlled aggression or uncontrolled. And here's the difference. Controlled aggression means that the opponent is thinking. He's defining ranges and he's trying to win. So he has some kind of thought process behind his actions. He's not just randomly pressing buttons. And uncontrolled is just gambling. And if you want an example, like extreme example, uncontrolled aggression is someone on pure monkey tilt. 3-betting 50%, going broke post-flop with anything, just pressing buttons. I mean, if you haven't seen the video of angry German kid, that's uncontrolled aggression. It's just no thinking process, no strategy, just get it in, gamble. Let's see who wins. I'm happy to get it in with any 4. And controlled is more of loose aggressive player. I mean, the modern tight aggressive, the modern PLO was considered loose aggressive 10 years ago. He's a maniac. He's c-betting so much. Oh, he is bluffing turns so often. Now it's a standard. But controlled aggression means that he's not 3-betting everything. He can have super wide ranges. But post-flop, he thinks what you can have. If he sees weakness, he attacks. He's bluffing a lot. He's semi-bluffing a lot. He's value betting a lot. But there's always some kind of thinking process behind it. And the biggest difference between these two is that controlled aggression can fold. Uncontrolled, don't count on fold equity. And there comes the difference. We can semi-bluff versus controlled aggression, but we cannot semi-bluff versus uncontrolled aggression. Versus uncontrolled, we only value bet. We can value bet thin, for sure, but every time we raise, we accept that, okay, probably the money is going. If it doesn't, nice bonus, but we don't count on that. Versus controlled aggression, we can do bluffs ourselves, or I mean semi-bluffs. And every time in poker, when we want to win money from someone, we want to generate edge. If our edge is bigger than the rate, we make money in the long run. And every strategy has a counter strategy. Even GTO, although no one can say in multi-way PLO, but what's the perfect GTO, even solvers are just approximations. But even GTO has a counter strategy, which is another GTO. But no one plays GTO, so every strategy has a counter strategy. And now someone might say that, okay, those maniacs don't have a strategy. They do. Even the uncontrolled aggression, who's just pressing buttons, he has a strategy. The strategy is to get it in with anything. He doesn't probably think that, okay, this is my strategy, but he has a strategy. Even total randomness would be a strategy. And every strategy has a counter strategy. We just have to figure out what's the opponent's strategy, what are the flaws in his strategy. Because if we skip the GTO thing, no strategy is perfect. So every strategy has a counter strategy. So you have to play the strategy versus strategy. And if we can find situations where we can exploit the opponent's strategy, we generate edge. So what you should be thinking, what are the flaws and leaks in my opponent's strategy? Or what are the characters of my opponent's strategy? Okay, he is aggressive. What's the counter strategy for aggression? Why aggression might fail? If aggression is perfect, why don't I do it? Okay, if I'm very aggressive on the tables, why it doesn't work? When it doesn't work, put it this way. And often the thing is that aggression is vulnerable for traps. Because then it's being aggressive in situations where the opponent is not weak. And that's the biggest flaw. If opponent is aggressive, it means he has wide ranges. How wide, it depends on opponent, but it's definitely wider than normal. And the first outcome is that you have to lower your criteria for a good hand. And the example is like in heads up. In heads up, both opponents play with around 80 to 85% VPIP. So the hand strength we need to continue post-flop or we need to stack off is way different than on 6-max. if you have seen some solver strategies in heads-up PLO and in 6-max situations, in heads-up people stack off more likely, they call the flop more likely. So the criteria of a good hand goes down. Because if we play heads-up with the same criteria as 6-max, then we end up folding too much post-flop. Because we are waiting for that good hand. And that's why aggression works, especially in small stakes, because people wait for good hands. And let's say we play 10 hands, and first 9, we call pre-flop, but we fold the flop. So we end up losing 9 times 3.5 BPs to our opponent, around 30 BPs. And then on the 10th hand, we get a good hand and we raise. And then opponent loses his 3.5 BP pre-flop open, and then probably 5 to 6 BP when he bet the flop. So he lost 10 big blinds. And we're happy that, okay, I finally hit my set, I raise, he fold in your face. But we missed the fact that we lost 30 big blinds and won 10 big blinds. So out of the 10 hands, we lost 20 big blinds. And it keeps going and going. So if we always only wait for the good hands, we don't get them often enough. Because sometimes when we have a good hand, the opponent has a good hand too. So if we just wait, then it works for the controlled aggression. If the opponent is uncontrolled, then we probably need to wait a bit more, because he's going to give us value anyway. But either one of these cases, the variance is super high, because pot gets bigger, ranges get wider. There's a lot of variance. Opponent stacks off more life. And then the thing is, you have to either accept the variance, or you have to find another table. I don't think there is any middle ground. Because if you stick with Maniac, you have to accept that, okay, I might lose a lot. It's like playing heads up. You can lose 10 buy-ins. Even when you are a much better player, you get it in always in good, you just don't come out as winner. So, when you have aggressive player in your table, first you have to think, do I want the variance? What's my bankroll? How do I react to swings? Is there better play tables open? A lot of questions, but if you sit on the table, you accept the variance. And the flaw, or not the flaw, the characteristic thing in aggressive strategy is that opponent is using aggression. And if we talk about controlled aggression, the uncontrolled is just getting in with anything. But in controlled aggression, the opponent is using the aggression in general in 2 situations. One, he has a strong hand. Let's get the money in. Let's bet. Let's raise. That's simple. Or you seem weak. He thinks he can make you fold. And now, some opponents have different criteria when you're weak. So some aggressive players attack when your weakness is on this level. Some only attack when it's on this level, and some attack when they see weakness when you don't even show it. So it's not all aggressives are the same. You have to figure out in what kind of situations he attacks. If I just check the flop without c-betting, does he go bananas? Or if I bet flop check turn, he always stabs me. Or on certain boards, if I bet small or raise small, he attacks often. That's the other thing. But then the basic strategy that we're going to do is we induce bluffs by acting weak ourselves. That's the simple thing. And often we can say that we're slow playing. That's what slow playing is. We play our hand in a different way than opponent thinks we would play. And like check calling with top set. Opponent thinks that, okay, he check called, he cannot have a strong hand. Let's fire up. And he bluffs. And then on the turn, board pairs, we check, he bets. because he thinks he has a high fold equity. And in general, we continue with weaker hands than normally. That's the lower the threshold of the criteria of a strong hand. So normally we would fold like bottom two pairs, or normally we would fold the top pair, and so on. Because the thing is, versus aggressives, we often have more value in our made hands, and often we don't have that much implied odds with our draws if they are obvious draws. Like if there's only one draw on the flop and it's a flush draw and we only have a flush draw, that's not the high value. It's so obvious what we have, but backdoors are more valuable versus aggression than normal. Because often when all the draws from the flop miss, they fire the river and they just don't believe us. But number one thing versus aggressive players is to have a plan on the flop. If you don't know your plan, then fold the hand. Because if we just call the flop, like, let's say we have a bottom two, and we just call, because it said in the video that we should continue with weaker hands, and we call with bottom two, turn is a blank, opponent bets, and we fold because the hand is so weak. That's not a good plan. That's where you start to bleed the money. Remember, if we lose 9 hands, then winning the 10th one is not enough. So you need to have a plan. Okay, I have bottom 2. What are my other cards? How many turns help us? On what turns I'm going to call him? On what turns I'm going to raise him? On what turns I'm going to fold if he bets? So you have a plan, because sometimes bottom 2 might be a strong hand on certain flops. On certain, it's not good. There are no good turns for us. We have to fold on almost any turn. Then we can fold the flop. So you need to have a plan. Am I going to call down on most runouts? Am I going to call if the flush doesn't complete? Am I going to call and then check raise the blank turn, or lead the blank turn, or check raise flushing turn? But you need to have a plan, because that creates certainty. And then, despite the plan, if you seem that it's not effective, then you can just outside the tables open up your plan and see, is this right? Let's put the hands on poker shoes and see the frequencies. Does it make sense here? Let's post it on the Discord forums. What do you guys think? Is this the good plan on this hand? And so on. So you can just work on your plan. But if you don't have a plan, there's nothing to work with. And the thing versus aggressive players is when we slow play, let's say we have a set and we slow play it, then especially out of position, we want to raise it when it's vulnerable, when we are at the commitment point. Let's say we check call the flop, and then we check the turn. We have a tri-top set, there's flush draw and straight draw on the board. We check the turn, opponent bets. Now we want to raise, because we end the hand. And then it's up to opponent whether he wants to call or not. Often aggressive players are not so good in equity, so they might just gamble it anyway. But then if we check call the turn, then 75% of the turns complete some kind of draw, and we have to check, and if opponent bets, do we check fold or check call? And if the board pairs, then we check, he might check back if he has showdown value, or he might bluff, then it works. But it's about where's the threshold of being committed. And now it depends on how vulnerable our hand is. Like if we have a top set and high flush draw, we might not want to expose our hand strength, because when we raise, we pretty much say to our opponent we have a damn strong hand. And that's the point when it's harder for him to make a mistake, unless he's seen that we actually raise with weaker hands too. But if we're 200 bps deep, things change. If we're in position, things change. If we're 50 bps deep, things change. every time when you have a strong hand, you have to think on the next street how many really bad cards there are, how many mediocre cards there are, how many really good cards there are. Like on the video about comparing lines, we do that game tree thing. Kind of same thing in your head. Just think, okay, if very many of the next, let's say, rivers are really bad for my hand, I have like top 2, then it's probably better to just get the money in here. We don't have to do decisions like if we get most of the money in with top 2 pairs, the opponent cannot exploit us. So it's easy. So that's what you have to think. How long I'm going to solo play. If we are 200, 300 pp's deep, we have to solo play all the way up to river. Because if we tell the opponent we have a set on the turn, he can put us in really nasty places on the river. And versus controlled aggression, we can raise flop and turns with dominating semi-bluffs. Meaning that versus uncontrolled, we raise hands where we have over 50% equity. Because we want to raise for value. As he's going to get it in anyway, we don't want to get it in with less than 50% equity. But versus controlled aggression, that can fold. We can raise the flop. Pretty much our hand strength is ace high, but we have a nut flush draw. So even if opponent calls or money goes in, we dominate a lot of his draws. Because he might get it in also with some kind of combo draw and suddenly his flush draw is dead. So we can start to raise flops and turns, and when we do, especially when we check call flop, check raise turn, and he sees that okay, he does have some draws in it, we get more value for our made hands. And if we start to check raise flops with draws, we can start to check raise flops with made hands too. But the key is dominating. Don't raise with 10 high flush draws. Because then there's a high chance he has just king high flush draw and he has a lot of equity to pursue. But let's say the flop is 10-6-3 and we have 10, like ace, jack 10 something. We have top pair, high flush draw over cards versus his stack of range. We are ahead actually. And so on. So we can fight aggression with aggression, but we need to have a range that dominates his continuation range. And then see how he reacts. If he keeps folding, which means he's very controlled, then we have to figure out, okay, how much we want to raise. But if he's kind of player who's a bit controlled, he's not calling with anything, but he stacks off lively, that's when we can think that, okay, our stack of range can be a bit lighter too, as long as it's dominating his. And one of the biggest rules you have to remember versus aggressive player is do not always call with draws and raise with nuts. I see this every day on the tables. Versus aggressive opponents, people play this way. They check on the flop with medium strength hands and draws, and when they hit top 2 or set, they raise. And if you're an aggressive player, it's so easy to play against this. This is the perfect example where you win 9 hands and win 30 BBs, then on the 10th hand you lose 10 BBs. Rinse and repeat, 20 big blinds profit every 10 hands. So easy. Too easy. Before I show you a couple of hand examples, few words about pre-flop. The thing is that if opponent 3-bets a lot, and I mean a lot, we can start to limp call pre-flop to play single raised pots. Normally we don't limp, but let's say we have a hand that we are not comfortable in 4-betting, and we are not comfortable in calling 3-bets. Let's say we have double suited jacks. And we don't want to 4-bet that hand. And bet calling 3-bets. We're not comfortable in that because we have a pocket pair. The chance to hit the flop is a bit mediocre and flush raise jack high. We can limp call pre-flop. Keep the SPR high with hand that has a nut potential. But then We have way more implied odds for it. So those are the pretty much only situations where I open limp. And then, like, if the opponent 3-bets 50% of hands, you can expect that there's very often 3-bets coming for you. Because if you just open your normal range and opponent 3-bets 50%, you end up folding a lot pre-flop and calling a lot pre-flop versus very undefined range. And then you fold a lot post-flop and you just beat the money away. Normally, the first thing we want to do, actually it's missing here, the first thing we want to do versus aggressive player is tighten up our pre-flop range. You can tighten up a lot. Because if we keep playing our normal range, the aggression beats us. We're not hitting the flops often enough. So we remove the bottoms of our range. We want to raise hands that we're comfortable in calling 3-bets or 4-betting ourselves. And then if we're not, we think, do we want to limp call or do we just fold? The thing is, we still open all of our strong hands, and those are the hands that we're happy to call the 3-bet, we're happy to 4-bet with. If the opponent is super aggressive 3-better. And my advice is do not start to 3-bet light or 4-bet light. That's not what we want to do. And now someone might think, why not? If opponent's 3-bet range is wide, why shouldn't we just 4-bet? Or if opponent opens almost any hand, why don't we just 3-bet a lot of hands? I'm going to show you that. Remember that controlled aggression calls your 3-bets or 4-bets. Uncontrolled just shoves pre-flop. And now, if we open up Odds Oracle, and let's say we have an ace 10 9 8 single suited. And we think that the opponent is opening so much, let's 3-bet that hand. And then opponent 4-bets, and we're like, okay, let's get the money in, my hand is ahead of his range. Well, the thing is that if we have ace 10, 9 of hearts and 8 of diamonds. So ace 10 9 8, I hope you can see it because it's so small, but it's ace 10 9 8 single suited to ace. And then the opponent is, let's say he 3-bets with 40% range. 30% range, sorry. So we open ace 10 9 8, he 3-bets 30% range, which is super wide, and we think, okay, let's 4-bet versus that wide range. The thing is that we're 48, 52, 49, 51 underdog preflop. So basically what happens, we get it in preflop 50-50. And that doesn't generate any money. That's a flip. I mean, we can take 100 flips and it still breaks even on the EV. We don't want to get it in with 50-50. I mean, that doesn't generate any edge. And opponent is super wide. I mean, 30% 3-bet range is super wide. 20% is on their good looking hand, so 30%, 1/3 of his range is crappy hand. Okay, let's make our hand double suited. Ace 10 9 8 double suited. It just goes the other way. 51-41 we are favored. Still flipping. And that's the thing. If opponent range is wide, these kind of hands are not strong ones. Let's put the double suited jack. I mean, jack 7-5. And let's give them. Let's make it double suited this way so you all can see it better than with the syntax. Jack 7-5 double suited. Still flipping 52-48. So Jack 7-5 double suited looks like a strong hand versus maniacs 3-better. If we get it in pre-flop, we are flipping. But if we have inbuilt equity like any aces on average, it's 65-35. It's huge. Random kings 57-43. Now we start to have the edge. And when we go to queens, it starts to pretty much go to the flipping part, depending on our queens. But if we have those overcards, we have ace, king, queen, queen, suddenly 60-40. So we can get it in with aces, we can get it in with kings, we can get it in with queens if we have ace, king in our hand. But jacks with 2 overcards, no. Queens with overcards, no. So then someone says that, okay, what about those high Broadway rundowns? We're crushing our opponent. Well, ace 10 9 8 wasn't crushing anyone. If we have single suited, let's say ace queen, 10 of hearts and 9 of diamonds. Ace queen then 9, single suited, flipping. Ace queen then 9, double suited, 55-45. Now we start to generate 10% equity edge. And the higher the cards are, the equity goes up, because that's when we hit higher pairs. We are blocking pocket kings from the opponent's range. And if he has, let's say, pocket queens, now we have 2 overcards instead of 1. And now we are 57-43, 56-44. Now we start to generate that equity. And if it's ace, king, queen, jack, let's make it big so it's easier. So Broadway rundown, 57-43. So pretty much versus aggressives, we want to start to 3-bet, 4-bet, aces, kings, queens, jacks with overcards, preferably queens with overcards, and then Broadway rundowns, double suited. Same hand, single suited, 55-45, still good, because there's the high card value is so high. So these are the hands we can shove pre-flop, take the 55-45 flip. Sometimes we are ahead, sometimes behind, but on average it's 55-45 flip. But you can see the variance. If we constantly get it in with 55-45, I mean, we risk 100 BBs to win 110 BBs. So we're risking 100 BBs to win 10 bit blinds minus the rate, which is probably 5 bit blinds or something. Or what's the cap is 3 bit blinds. So we're risking 100 BBs to win 6 or 7 bit blinds. It's plus EV, but the variance is super high. And you can win a lot, you can lose a lot. You have to embrace the variance. Alright, then I have a few hands. Let's see, these are not in order. So, just a second when I do get them open. And, alright. Let's start with this one. We have pocket aces. And there's antes. We decide to 3-bet. Of course, we have aces, and open just calls. And then the flop is jack, jack 4. And especially in 3-bet pots where opponent puts you on aces, SPR3, these are the flops where they can be aggressive. Because if we bet fold these flops, he's generating tons of money. So we have 2 options. We can either bet and just call down, or we can check and induce a bluff. And that's what Hero did here. He checks, so opponent stabs the turn for sure. And now we call. And now our hand is pretty much, or in our eyes of our opponent, our hand looks like pretty much what we have try over pair. If we have a jack, we probably would raise here, or could slow play, who knows. But he thinks we have overpair, which we have often. And now the problem is he's going to barrel the river with pot sizing. And if we fold thinking that, okay, he has it, he's making a lot of money. And we're folding almost 100% of our range. We don't have queens in our range for sure. So the plan is made on the flop. Check flop, call turn, call river, and then it's up to variance. Especially if the river is blank. If this was a queen of spades, it might change things because we could easily have the aces with spades. But now when it's blank, he fires, and opponent shows kings, and now the question is that value or bluff? But it has to be the bluff, because the only smaller overpair fills up on the river, which is queens. So he's trying to make us fold aces. And if we do fold here pocket aces, it's super profitable for him. So versus aggressive opponents, you need to do this kind of stuff. And if he has a jack, then he has a jack. Of course, he's going to have a jack of 4 decent amount of times. But if we check the flop, he's going to bet the turn. And if we call the turn, he's going to fire a lot of rivers. Until he sees that, okay, you make call downs with aces, pay attention. Does he keep firing these boards, or is he just value betting this board? So if he is controlled maniac with controlled aggression, he can think, and he might see that, okay, we're not folding aces on these boards. He stops bluffing at them. So you have to pay attention. All right, then we have double suited kings. Aggressive player calls. And then the flop is super dry. And we decide to bet. And we're 100 pips deep, it's PLO 50. The plan here is if the aggressive player raises, we just get it in, because his raising range is so wide. We are blocking 2 pairs a little. We have overpair, backdoor flush draw, 1 pair on the board. We are not bet folding. That would be horrible. And bet calling creates problems. Turn doesn't change anything. So if I'm not happy to stack off, I probably would check call, keep the pot smaller, keep my range a bit wider. But he just calls, and the turn is 6. And now the turn is such a nasty one, it fills up 5-3. Which is definitely in his range, but it's rainbow, relatively blank. So now we need to come up with a plan once again. Do we bet? And just 3%. If I had a blocker to 5 or 3, we could bet. But without any blockers, it's a check. And then he goes a bit. And now, if we think about his range, which is super wide on the flop, he could value bet 2 pairs. But would he with that sizing? He might, especially 10-6. But when we bet flop check turn, he could easily stab here with super wide range, like any 10 with cut shot, any pair. And if we fold this hand, we bet flop and check fold the turn, we're going to end up folding a lot. But this is a bit more borderline, because now there are no good rivers. Now the problem is there are a lot of good rivers, so if we call, we pretty much have pocket kings on the river, unless the river is ace, king, or deuce. Pairing rivers are good for us for sure, because then it's very unlikely that he has strong hand. So this is more borderline, but I decide to call, and then the plan is pretty much, if the river is total blank, then see his sizing, or if the board pairs, then bluff catch. And board does pair, and we follow up with the plan, which is a check, and he bets less than half a pot, which is weird sizing. Actually, this sizing is a bit more scarier than big one, but we follow up the plan and we do call. And he shows up king, queen, 10-3. So he had a 10 and blocker, kind of hand that we could fire the turn. And then on the river, he turns the 10 into a bluff. And I think the river is a weird bet. Like, if he wants us to fold overpair, why bet so small? So now I can see a flaw in his strategy. It cannot be a value bet, and for bluffing, the sizing is a bit small in my opinion. If he had bet like $19, he would make the life of a lot of opponents harder with overpairs. So definitely worth making notes with the sizing and the hand way he played. And then one more, we have tri-pocket jacks. Somewhat aggressive player decides to call, 100 pp's deep, we flop the top set on Jack 9-7. And now, we could definitely bet, but this kind of board also allows a lot of combo draws, like pair with flush draw, two pair with open-ender, and so on. Cut shot with the flush draw, open-ender with the flush draw, and flush draw with a blocker of 10 or 8. If we bet, what I expect is this specific opponent might actually raise quite a lot. Of course, we can just get it in, and then take the 60-40 or 50-50 flip, or we might be 65-35 behind. He definitely has a lot of straights in his range too. So what I decide here is to check and induce a bluff, because if I check the flop, he's going to fire any blank turn. And one option is to bet, and then if he raises, is just get it in. But when we have a 9 blocker, we are blocking our own outs. So we are not probably going to get it in crushing unless he has 7s. And turn is complete blank. But it's a 3. Once again, we don't have that many outs. So he bets 140. Now we have two options. We can raise or we can fold. Call, sorry. We don't ever fold here. That would be horrible. But if we bet, he's going to call very often. And now the problem is that we don't have that many full house outs. We have only 8. So very often, over 80% of times, the river completes something and it's not good for us. And then we have to check back. So I'm calling here, keep his range wide. And then the plan is pretty much call all the blank rivers. And the thing is that if the river pairs the board, we still have full house in our range in his eyes. So what we want here is a blank river. And we do get a one. Of course, 4-6 gets there, which can be in his range. Air on the flop, picks up, draw on the turn, stabs it. And he bets. I don't think we have much value in raising, because we are only going to get called with the straights. But there's a lot of value in calling, because our hand looks like missed flush draw a lot. And then opponent shows with 6 blockers flush draw, with blockers to the 6-8 and 6-4. So once again, he used his blockers. It's often also worth making notes on aggressive opponents. Are they aggressive with blockers, or are they aggressive, like if he has here ace king 3 deuce without flush draws? Like just totally playing versus your weakness. Because the more he has strategy behind here, like here, he has a flush draw, he has a pair, and he has 6s as a blockers. Then it's more controlled aggression. But if he stabs the turn with anything and barrels the river with anything, then it's a way different story. So make notes versus aggressive so you can exploit them a bit more. So there's actually one long video, 45 minutes. And the thing is, I cannot tell you what's the best strategy versus aggressive. Like on the top set, you always do this. Here you should check raise exactly this range, because it's so opponent based. There are many different levels of aggression, many different ways to be aggressive. But you need to figure out what the opponent is doing and why, and then find the counter strategy. And on the video, I explain some basic principles, basic concepts, how we can start to fight aggression. And I hope you enjoyed it. I will see you on the next video. Bye bye.